or who. We're recording the meeting, as you've just heard, but don't worry because you're not being recorded. It's just me and the slides. I would love for you to be as interactive as you feel comfortable being during this session, because really you've taken an hour out of your busy days to be here. And I really want to make sure that, you get what you came for, really. So please feel free. I'm quite good at multitasking, although apparently it's not good for your stress levels, but anyway, we'll talk more about that later. So do message me in the chat if you have any questions, or if you sort of want to say, Debbie, can we talk about XYZ? As long as it's kind of related to stress management, then why not? Let's talk about it. So just a little bit about me, really, so that you know where I come from on this. I have run a medical insurance business actually called Best Health for 16 years before deciding that insurance is fabulous. But what is even better when you run a business and when you're in a business is preventing the mental health issues or the physical health issues from going wrong in the first place. So I decided to go back to university and do a master's in workplace health and well-being. I've worked all my life, and I feel that it's really important when we're at work. We spend a huge chunk of time at work, don't we? That we should be as happy and fulfilled and productive as possible. But stuff gets in the way, doesn't it? And when I did my master's, I decided I really wanted to specifically study stress. So I did a qualification in stress management. Um, and I wanted to then kind of hone in even more. So I did a mental health first aid instructor course. So I teach the mental health first aid courses as well. And as you probably know, some of your people at GCMA are qualified mental health first aiders. I'm not sure if you know how to find out who they are. Are any of you on this session today?
Yes, I
Yes, Richard, I thought I recognized your
am.
face. So there you are. He is, and anyone else a qualified mental health first aider today on the course? No. Okay. So I run those 2-day sessions for GCMA as well. But today we're focusing specifically on stress. Um, I want to invite you to answer any questions that I throw at you, but you don't have to answer them in the chat publicly. You can answer them privately. So I don't know how familiar you are with Zoom, but in the chat, you can actually, instead of selecting everyone, you can just select me. So if you do want to answer something that I've asked you, or you want to ask a question privately, just message me privately and I won't attribute your question or your response to your name, because I really want you to feel that you can interact. So really what we're doing in this hour together, as well as taking anything that you want to talk about, I'm planning to talk about just demystifying stress and a little bit of resilience, which is the sort of counter position, if you like, to stress. But I also want to talk a little bit about how does stress affect us, but also then moving on to, like, let's benefit from the good sides of stress. So you might think, is there a good side? But I promise you that there can be a good side of stress. But I wanted to first of all invite you to answer, why you came to this session in the first place. Of course, it's Mental Health Awareness Week. It's great that this session is offered to you as part of your membership, but there must be a motivation for you coming. And I would love to know in the chat, if you're willing to share, what is it for you? Because we all have our coping mechanisms, and this slide is, being a bit sarcastic, really, because banging your head against a wall is not a great strategy. But I'm sure I'm not the only one who has felt driven to literally bang my head against a wall or scream into a pillow when I have felt stressed. So, this is not a strategy that I am proposing that you adopt. Do not print this out and stick it on a hard wall and follow the instructions in the circle. So, I want to talk today about sort of stress management techniques, really. So, my first question to you really is, why are you here? Because me guessing why you're here is probably not good enough. So in the chat, let me know. I can see some of you typing. If you'd rather just unmute and share, then of course that is an option, but otherwise, please type away. Thank you, Craig. So to be able to work firstly on what triggers my stress. Yeah, I love the fact, Craig, that you have put yourself first, because you're absolutely right. We have to put ourselves first, and then we can be really useful to help other people. So anyone else have any reason for being here today? Want to be more aware of mental stress, be more proactive as an MHFAder. Thank you, Richard. That's great news. And Kerry, to learn about our wellbeing workshops. Oh, okay, you work for GCMA, of course, recognize you. Okay. Well, everyone else, I'm just going to take a bit of a guess. Oh, hang on, but I have had a private message, two private messages. So one is saying to understand what is stress, because it's very subjective. Really good point. And I also want to know how to identify it and then deal with it effectively. Brilliant. We're going to cover that. So I'm happy. And then Darren saying you've got a diverse team with different needs. So we are all individual. How do we all individually deal with stress? Might be a useful thing to consider today. And then another private message saying to help work out what causes me issues to get stressed so that I can deal with that first. Brilliant. Okay. So that's kind of what I guessed. I thought that might be why you were coming. I was hoping that you were interested to understand more about coping with what life throws at us and the people that some of you manage as well. So we're going to allow ourselves, hopefully today, to think about what that word stress means, and hopefully leave you feeling like you have some tools to deal better with not only yourself, but with the people that you manage, and the people that you interact with. We are running another session tomorrow, just more about general mental health. And then on Thursday, we're running a session that is specifically more about how do you deal with people that are probably stressed and can then be quite difficult. So that's what's coming up after this session. So again, I just want to come back to you. What is stress? What do you think it is? How do you define stress? Because you all work in, well, some of you, I think, work in golf clubs. You're golf club managers, some of you. Perhaps if you're not, let me know. What is it then? What does stress mean to you? How do you define it? It's very individual, isn't it? But what is it for you? Is it a good thing? Can it be a good thing? What is it for you? So any words that come to mind when you think about that
When
word
I,
stress?
Debbie, when I was
Richard.
working, I love stress. I work better under stress, which was bizarre, and it took me a long time to understand that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so perhaps it's the adrenaline, or I don't know what it, did you ever identify why?
It just helped me solve issues
Right.
and solve problems, and I was better solving or under stress than I was not without stress.
Yeah.
Bizarrely.
Yeah, well, as it's not bizarre because I think a lot of us are like that. But the problem is when you're constantly stressed, obviously that then can become a problem. And as Darren says, it can be good, but it does need to be managed. And really, that's what we're sort of talking about here. So I just want you to sort of think about what's going on when you're stressed and what do you notice when you experience stress? Because in any event that is challenging you, any scenario that's challenging you, we very quickly make a judgment about whatever that event is, whatever that situation is. And when we don't think we can cope, that belief, I can't cope, is what causes the consequences of stress. Now, I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on that, because if we think we can or we don't think we can cope, if we think we cannot cope, we become stressed. We move into a stress state. So, this statement I'm making is implying it's about how you feel about the stress that causes you to be stressed. So, I just wanted to sort of put that to you and see what your thoughts are on that. Do you believe your brain is that powerful? If you don't think you can cope, you become stressed. What are your thoughts on that? I'm just going to read a private message while you're thinking. You're saying stress is bad. It's a culmination of unmade decisions or making decisions that won't or can't change the outcome. Good stress. Stress could be a timeline or an important decision to be made by a certain time. So thank you for that answer. So those of you that are not sure about this, Richard, you're saying too much stress make decision making a lot more difficult to deal with the key problems. So I want to convince you today that actually, if we think we can cope, then we are less likely to be stressed. And I just want to expand on that because the reason we usually feel there is too much going on is usually because of four things. One is too much. So there's too much. So can you think of an example of when too much has caused you stress? And again, just in the chat, maybe you could think of one example of when that feeling of too much has caused you to feel stressed. What specifically made you say this is too much? Thank you. An outside influence. And we're going to explore that a little bit more, that concept of outside influence. But some of you might also think too much work could be an answer to that. But what about this one? Too little. When has the feeling of too little caused you stress? And Kerry, you're saying when the clock is ticking and you have to meet a deadline. So that's when you feel too much. But what about too little? So yeah, feeling unsupported while having to hit targets and projects to complete. What about, or too little revenue? Yeah, it's a really good example, Paul. Thank you. What about too soon? When have you felt that? Too soon has caused you stress. Too soon. Perhaps you're not ready for something. Perhaps you're not prepared for something. Any other thoughts? Okay, let me move on to the last one then. Too late. So can you think of an example of when too late causes stress? So that the purpose really of showing you this is that you can actually understand what situations cause you pressure and why you can actually challenge yourselves to either A, accept the reality, or B, know how to manage the reality and take control. So in order to help ourselves manage stress, we need to understand what contributes to the stress in our lives. Stress is usually a result of an external factor. As Craig said, an outside influence. And normally stress is due to an external factor, an outside influence that is also outside of our control and that we did not predict. And that creates us to have these statements, these thoughts in our mind, too much, too little, too soon. And when that happens, that can easily send us completely into a spin mentally. And feel completely out of control. And our human brains do not like that. We like control. And when we don't have control, we tend to doubt if we can cope because we feel powerless. We start to focus on all the things we cannot control. And we forget that we actually mostly have control, some control or influence. And we start to see issues and problems, and we rarely see solutions. And that is not helpful. And things build up over time, and lots of seemingly unimportant things, these two events, too much, too little, too soon, too late, they can make us feel stressed. And they are really sometimes actually quite insignificant. So what we want to try and do is to think about moving into a different mindset. If we do think we can cope, we move to peak performance. If we say to ourselves, yes, I do have the resources, then we can move to peak performance rather than stress state. Now, stress is a kind of immediate reaction. Our body goes into this mode of stress in a flash. But we can take a little step back and go, okay, I'm going to just think this through for a moment, and I'm going to see about whether I can change my immediate thought of I can't cope. So let's just think for a moment about when we need stress. We've already had a few comments about saying stress can be really useful. And actually, when we think about stress, yes, of course it can be useful, because if you're about to walk into a road with without really concentrating, like people seem to do a lot nowadays, on their phones, walk out into the road, you see a car coming, your body needs to quickly respond and move you back onto the safety of the pavement. So just to use that as an example. So of course we need stress, we need that response. But when we think of the sort of the Stone Age challenges, what were they, the Stone Age challenges, when we really, really did need our stress response to work? We were worrying about important things like food, like shelter, like survival, like community. But nowadays, our habits have changed dramatically, socially, behaviorally, our lifestyle, our communication skills. But physiologically, we actually haven't really changed very much in about the last 600,000 years. And actually, if we think about a zebra running for its life from a lion, it has exactly the same stress response as we do from just thinking about something like our mortgage. So today, the body reacts to the perception of threat in the same way, even though there is not often a physical danger. And nowadays, we tend to fight this desire to fight or flight. And that's what I'm talking about here, the fight or flight response. We tend to internalize our emotions. And if we can't communicate or express how we feel, we experience this buildup of really quite negative emotions, anger, frustration, resentment. And that means these chemicals that we've produced to help us mobilize and maybe fight, they get built up. So we're literally sort of stewing in our own juices. So what happens to you? You might not want to share this with everyone else, but when you think about you, when you are stressed, what physiological change do you feel? And in the chat, maybe you could answer that question. Because at the beginning, when I said, why are you here? Some of you said, because I need to spot when I'm stressed and then take some action and do something about it. And I also need to spot when other people are stressed. So let's just think about, how do we do that? How do we sort of nip it in the bud and manage a situation before it kind of gets out of control? What do you notice about yourself? Now, you can message me privately if you prefer. What kind of person are you? There's no criticism or judgment, by the way. If you cry when you're stressed, that's a very common emotional response to stress. So just for a moment, have a little think, what do I do? Even if you don't want to share it with me. And by the way, I won't share it with anyone else if you share it just with me. But just stop and think, what do I do? Now, literally nobody has messaged me. Is that because you don't know? Oh, Craig, bless you. Thank you. You've messaged me. Okay, shut down verbally at home. Thank you. And then the anxiety kicks in. Darren, I withdraw. Okay, the messages, you felt sorry for me then, didn't you? Because the messages are coming in. So I won't say who said these because they're all private. Sleepless night, palpitations, overwhelmed and unable to make an informed decision, and often will make decisions based on emotions or become short and abrupt with others. So this is difficult to admit, but if you know that about yourself, that's a really good start. And then someone else is saying, I became withdrawn when I was stressed. But have a look at this slide here. This is what we know happens with the fight or flight. This is human. We're all human. So it's no surprise if any of these things that you can see on this slide happen to you. And some of you have said that. Some of you have said palpitations, anxiety, that feeling of overwhelm. So we literally have that faster heartbeat. I mean, maybe you notice that your nostrils are flaring. It's a bit more of a subtle thing. Maybe you notice that you're more sensitive to touch. Maybe you notice that you're going to the toilet more often. And I promise you that regularly, when I get people to really think about their stress signs, their stress signature, I tend to refer to this as frequent going to the toilet is a very common thing. Because when you're in fight or flight mode, your body sort of sends all of its energy to survival. You do not need your bladder being full to weigh you down. If you're a zebra and you're running away from that lion, you're just going to empty your bladder or your bowel. So you get a dry mouth. You are not worrying about producing saliva because your energy is diverted. Your hair is on end. You feel tense. Think about your muscles right now. What are your muscles doing right now? How are your shoulders? What about your jaw? How does your jaw feel right now? We hold a lot of stress in our jaw. Even getting temporomandibular joint syndrome, TMJ, if anyone's ever had that. I had that when I was stressed about 30 years ago. Luckily, I've not had it since because my jaw literally locked. The tension I was holding in that jaw was very strong. And then we start to get sweaty. We get butterflies in our stomach. So these are all the signs that we're getting stressed. And we have to start with ourselves, as Craig quite rightly said. What sign do I notice about myself? Now, it might be that it's not a physiological or a physical sign that you've noticed. What about your behavior? What do you notice about yourself? And if you're willing to share, please do. Now, recently, I got quite stressed and I noticed that I just couldn't listen to the news. I cannot hear any more about terrible things happening in the world because my stress levels were just too high. I just couldn't cope. And I just stopped listening to the news. So what about you? What else do you notice about yourself behaviorally that tells you, okay, this is it. I've reached my limit. And I just want to sort of show you this in a few different ways. So for example, I think my cat's just come in. I think, for example, that if we look at this pressure performance curve for a moment, and we start to think about stress a bit differently here, when we have the right amount of stress, the right amount of pressure, we're in this zone that is very nice, and it's called the stretch zone. This is the zone that is showing as yellow. It's called stretch. If we don't have enough pressure, we're in our comfort zone, and we're a little bit bored actually, because we're not stretched, we're not performing well. So we're in our comfort zone, we're bored. However, if we don't notice some of the signs that I just showed you, if we don't notice this, if we ignore our dry mouth, if we ignore the little cough that we're getting or that we're going to the toilet a lot, we're going to move into this zone that we don't want to be in. We don't want to be in the pink zone. We start to notice that we're moving into the strain zone. Strain zone is when you are noticing that you're overwhelmed or you're not making decisions or all of these signs you just shared with me. We need to then pull ourselves back into that stretch zone, because if we don't, we're going to get unwell. We're going to become fatigued. We need to manage this. But we sometimes are so sort of disconnected from our bodies and we kind of ignore the signs, don't we? Well, I do. I don't know. I'm sure other people as well. So we have this unrealistic expectation that we can carry on like we are and we're performing quite well and we're coping, but we're not. So what we need to do is spot the difference between the stress state and peak performance. So when you look at this, again, I just want to get you thinking, and you don't have to share, but do you think the people you manage are in this nice stretched zone? Do you think you're in this nice stretch zone, this nice yellow zone? Where are you? I mean, I would be sad to think that you were heading towards burnout. And if you are, please, please, please speak to Richard or me or one of your MHFAs. If you're heading towards burnout, we have to take action. We have to get you back to stretch. But where are you right now? Just ask yourself this question. Because if you're not in the stretch, or perhaps you're moving out of strain zone back into stretch, then we need to start taking action. So perhaps you have been somewhere else in the past in your life. Perhaps you've been that person that was ill and that was in the pink zone. But honestly, work is not worth being in that pink zone. You know, you don't have to be there if you manage stress well. So no one's letting me know where they are, but perhaps you've had a little moment to reflect where you are on this graph, because I'm going to move on. Because spot the difference. You know, stress state impairs our memory. We can't focus, we can't make decisions. We are negative. We see more obstacles. We're demotivated. We start to get unwell. Whereas peak performance, that's where we want to be. We're focused, we're learning, we're creative. And thank goodness for Darren. That's where Darren is right now. So I'm happy for you. Where are you, Darren? Is your camera off? Oh yeah, you've got a dog. You've got a Labrador. But yeah, Darren's in stretch, so that's great. But where are you? Because if you're not in peak performance, you're not going to be doing your job at your best. You're not going to be resilient and committed. You're going to be unsatisfied, and your health might not be so great. So we need to think about building. You see this yellow zone of stretch, it's quite small. You know, what we need to try and do is make that bigger. We need to sort of try and be more resilient. And when I talk about resilience, this is the definition that Harvard came up with: the ability to recover from setbacks, adapt well to change, and keep going in the face of adversity. So this is about bouncing back. You know, and research has shown that resilience is ordinary. It's not extraordinary. People commonly demonstrate resilience. It's not a fixed quality. We can all become resilient. But when you're busy and stressed, you don't have time to focus on resilience. But if you're finding that you're moving into this zone, this pink zone, we do have to do something about building our resilience. It's not a trait that people either have or don't have. It involves behaviors, it involves thoughts, it involves actions that can be learned, and it can be developed by anybody. And there is a golfer, and I'm glad I can get a golf reference in for once, because you don't have a golfer as your well-being trainer. You have a netball player. But anyway, a golfer called Dr. Harry Barry has written a fabulous book, and it's called Emotional Resilience. And yep, I've had a message saying resilience is the main ingredient for any manager. From what I've heard from speaking to a lot of the managers in GCMA, you need to be resilient. But these are skills that you can build. And I really do not have shares in Dr. Harry Barry's book, but if you want to focus on resilience, he is very good at sort of showing you how to gradually build your resilience, but it takes time. So stress management is like in the background, you're slowly building your resilience, but in the foreground, you're firefighting a little bit and you're managing your current stresses. So we build resilience to make this zone bigger. So this stretch zone, we can work on making this bigger. But in the meantime, we have to do a little bit of managing stress. So let's just think for a moment, what are our work-related stressors? Because we are one person, we've got one hat for work, maybe one hat for stuff outside of work, but you are just one person. And you have a work and a work-life balance, hopefully, that that is good for your mental health. But these are the sorts of work stressors that we see. And this is from the Health and Safety Executive. So often people say that they are not able to cope with the demands of their jobs. That's the kind of work-related stressor that people tell us about. Often people say that when they are unable to control the way they do their work, this is a stressor. And this is perhaps part of our session on Thursday. But because of the way golf clubs are structured, the sort of committee system that some of you have in the private member clubs, perhaps sometimes it feels like you're not actually able to control the way you do your work. And that could be very difficult. People sometimes say they don't receive enough information and support, and that can make them stressed. Sometimes people say they are having trouble with relationships at work, or they're even feeling like they're being bullied at work. And of course, this is a stressor. Sometimes people say they don't actually even fully understand their role and their responsibilities, or perhaps their role and their responsibilities has changed and they just haven't had the time to sort of refresh themselves. Sometimes people say they're not engaged when a business is undergoing change. So these are what we see as the main work stressors. Does any of that resonate with you? Or is there anything else going on in your world that is a stressor that is different to what you are seeing here? It's just a question to ask yourself, because stress management is first about identifying what are the work-related stressors and what are my other stressors and what is going on as an entirety. So feel free to message me privately, because I think everyone else on the chat would be really pleased to hear it if you've got a work-related stressor that they also have. So in the chat, is there anything else that I've not included before I move on to teach you a stress management tool that Richard will know all about, because we do this on the mental health first aid training courses? Okay. Well, if you're typing, carry on typing, but I'll move on, because when I asked you what are your workplace stressors, actually we all have this what we call stress container. And this is just, a container that could be like this glass I'm holding up. Your stress container could be as big as this glass, but your stress container could be, that big. We've all got a different size stress container. This just represents our vulnerability. It might be that your brother or your sister seems to be able to cope with stress much better than you. They've got a big container, you've got a small container. That's just because of life experiences, because of skills that you've learned. Could be partly to do with genetics, but we all have a particular size container that we need to manage. And stress comes into our container, and you'll notice that there is this sort of green arrow. And this green arrow is basically our stress container overflowing. So when I said to you, I got to a point last week because of all sorts of things where I felt like I couldn't cope, my stress signature was I couldn't sleep very well. I couldn't even listen to the news. And I just didn't feel like I could be bothered to do anything, really. So it's a very personal thing, your stress signature. So I want to invite you today to think about this. This is a bit of a reflection for you. But the third thing I want you to think about is, what are your coping strategies? Because when you're stressed, so when I noticed that I was not able to listen to the news, what did I do to cope? I could have drunk lots of alcohol and thought, yeah, that will help. But actually, that's quite an unhelpful coping strategy. It would have actually meant I got even less sleep. So instead, my helpful coping strategies were kicked in. Talking to friends, sharing how I felt with my loved ones, allocating tasks to other people, my children, who are old enough to do the washing up and cook. So I want to invite you today to do this activity. And if you don't want to do it right now, you don't have to do it right now. But I invite you to just, on a piece of paper, maybe after this session, make yourself your favorite hot drink, get a big piece of paper and some colored pens, draw a shape, and in that shape, write everything on that piece of paper that is in your head that is worrying you right now. And then I want you to ask yourself, what do I do that is helpful? Do I talk to friends? Do I talk to my wife? Do I talk to my colleagues? Do I make it known? What do I do? And what do I do that's unhelpful? And the final step of this stress management technique, which is very simple, but the simple things work. What is my stress signature? How do I know when I'm stressed? Do I actually just ignore it when I've got a bit of a cough, or when I got a tummy ache, or when I get that uncomfortable butterflies in my stomach feeling? Or actually, okay, yeah, that is my stress signature. If you don't know what your stress signature is, then it's just work in progress. Over the next week, throughout the whole of Mental Health Awareness Week, learn about yourself, learn about your stress signature, check in with yourself, ask your friends, have you noticed what I do when I'm stressed? Whoever you know the most, whoever lives with you, if you live with anyone, if you don't know, I bet you they'll know. They'll be like, oh yeah, didn't you know that you kind of have a twitchy eye? Or didn't you know that you just shout at me all the time when you're stressed? Or didn't you know that you don't do the recycling when you're stressed? So I don't know what it could be. I'm just giving you some ideas people have shared in the past. So this is your challenge, is to do this activity. Here's an example of what might come up for you. So you're in your container, might be that you're worrying about money for the club, or money generally for your life, your house, your retirement. Maybe you're worrying about work. Maybe you're worrying about relationships. But don't forget about the happy stuff, right? Because the happy stuff, it's called eustress, EU stress. Doesn't stand for European Union. It's called eustress. And it's about the happy things. So if you're getting married, that's a happy thing. If you're having a baby, happy. Moving house, happy, but very stressful actually as well. So don't forget about the happy things. Changing job, promotion at work, happy, but stressful. And I also want to invite you to think about your stress signature. Do you get headaches? Do you get sleep problems? Do you get a tummy ache? And your coping strategies. Do you exercise? Do you play golf? Do you meditate? Do you drink alcohol? So that's your invitation. Do you want to take the challenge? So that's for you to decide. And I promise you it works. But I also want you to invite you to take another idea. And I want you to start to think about, in these moments when we're stressed, what can we control? So you might take your stress container, whatever you've written in your stress container, you might look at that and you might ask yourself, what is within my control here? And what is outside of my control? Because we can then adopt the right approach for managing what we cannot control and managing what we can control or influence. So, for example, there's no point in making a list or prioritizing things that we need someone else to do unless we're going to talk to them about it. So lists and prioritization skills are great for if we can control or if we can influence. On the other hand, distraction is a useful approach if we're worrying about some event that's coming up or a piece of news that we're worrying about. But it's not a useful technique if we're trying to reduce the stress of a deadline that has been moved forward a week. So here are some sort of tips really for both. And it's often harder to manage when we cannot control things. So let's just start there. When we are really overwhelmed or really wound up or agitated, thinking clearly It's just not possible, is it? The brain doesn't work like that. We're in panic mode. Our brain has gone into the fight or flight. So we need to regulate our nervous system before we can even notice what we can control. So we need to basically help get our brains back into functioning mode before we even think about what we can control. So I just want to talk through a few techniques. For example, power pauses. Now, I'm sure you're busy at work. You've got members coming into your office, those of you that manage clubs, you've got people to please, you've got work, you've got all these worries going on. But we can just the best thing to do sometimes is just take a break. Just put the do not disturb sign up if you're at work, but do something to distract your brain for a moment and get your brain to be reset almost. It's like you reset the nervous system so that you can think clearly. And social connection is a great way to calm our nervous system. Laughing, kindness to other people, making someone a cup of tea. So saying how we feel actually often helps to reduce the stress that we feel. So sharing with somebody how you feel. As a social connection, it releases oxytocin, which is the hormone that really helps us. Just breathe if that works for you. Stop and count your breath for a few minutes. Move, change location. There's something that we all have. It's called a cognitive scaffold. And the brain gets into this sort of way of thinking in certain environments. So changing your environment, it can shift our thinking and our feeling and literally just get you some perspective. Okay, so the things that we can do to manage what we can control, planning, right? Plan your day. I mean, I'm not trying to teach you how to do your jobs. You're all very skilled people, but there are skills that we just forget about sometimes. Breaking big, challenging things into small steps, using routines with cues to start habits and rewards when we do them. There's a term called eating the frog first. It's doing the thing that you most want to procrastinate about, but using the small steps, setting alarms for taking action, setting alarms for taking breaks. Challenge your thinking. And that's what I want to end with, is talking about thinking, because I said at the beginning, you don't have to accept your thought of, I can't do it. You can challenge your thoughts. We can always change our view. We can always, when we can't change a situation, we can change how we feel about the situation. So perhaps ask yourself, what else might be true here? What could I learn from this? Collaboration, knowing we're not alone. We don't need to be alone. That's a key part of knowing we do have the resources to cope. So just for a moment, let's just think about, what am I talking about here with these thoughts that we sometimes get, because actually, do you agree with me? We sometimes get these negative beliefs that occur habitually, and negative thinking is never going to make your life positive. So what kind of examples can you think of that have been thoughts you've had before that have been just really quite unhelpful for you? For example, I feel like I'm up against the world, or I'm just no good. I've let people down. No one understands me. I don't think I can do this. I'm so weak. I'm disappointed in myself. So what other thoughts have you had? And again, you might want to do that privately to me, or please feel free to share. Hidden agendas. Yeah. My future is bleak. Okay. I can't finish anything. So we can change these to more positive thoughts. So what we have to do actually is this is called cognitive behavior therapy, but we can do this for ourselves. We don't need therapy. We can manage those thoughts, because thoughts create feelings. And we can actually start to change those thoughts so that the feelings change. Those feelings create behavior. Behavior reinforces our thoughts. So we have this cycle that really affects our mood and contributes to stress. And it can be a really vicious cycle. So thinking about things that make you feel stressed, you know, what thoughts does that bring up for you? What feelings does that bring up for you? And how does that affect your mood? So another exercise I want to invite you to do as part of stress management is taking some time to think of a scenario when you've had some sort of automatic unhelpful thought or a negative thought, and think, how could I change that to a positive one or a helpful one? So this is, again, a really good stress management technique. I don't know, can anyone think of an example? I've got an example here, which is probably not so relevant to you, but for example, the trigger, I was late to class or I was late to work. Your automatic negative thought is, I'm hopeless. I'm going to fail the semester in a student's case. But then you adapt your thought. Okay, I didn't plan my route well, but I'm going to fix that. And next time I'll get an earlier train. So can anyone put that into the context of a GCMA type scenario? A trigger that you've had that triggered you to have this negative thought that you can actually change. It's a tricky one, isn't it? But I'm sure if you take some time to think about it, you can come up with it. And yes, it's important. Thank you for sending that. It's important to learn from your mistakes. So challenge your thoughts. And here's some examples of some unhelpful thinking styles. And you might have heard of some of these, and this is very common. You know, we need to know what to look for. It's often the case that we're not even aware that we're thinking in an unhelpful way, and it can make it very difficult to catch these thoughts in the first place. But if we know what sort of thinking is unhelpful, we might find it easier to spot it. So, do you have a negative mental filter? Do you find yourself catastrophizing situations? Do you find yourself moving into these unhelpful thinking styles? So, you can practice catching these negative thoughts. You can check your unhelpful thoughts. You can look for evidence to support your thoughts. Are there any other explanations for these thoughts? And this will help you manage stress. Now, I want to play you, and I hope this plays okay, but worrying about stress is a stress itself. Now, we know this, and we can start to see stress differently. And if you do that, you'll start to notice changes. So we need to make stress our friend. And at the end, I've got some resources to share with you. This is Kelly McGonigal. She's a stress expert. And I just wanted to get you to listen to this. So I hope the sound works.
Let me start with the study that made me rethink my whole approach to stress. This study tracked 30,000 adults in the United States for 8 years. And they started by asking people, how much stress have you experienced in the last year? They also asked, do you believe that stress is harmful for your health? And then they used public death records to find out who died. Okay, some bad news first. People who experienced a lot of stress in the previous year had a 43% increased risk of dying. But that was only true for the people who also believed that stress is harmful for your health. People who experienced a lot of stress but did not view stress as harmful were no more likely to die. In fact, they had the lowest risk of dying of anyone in the study, including people who had relatively little stress. Now, the researchers estimated that over the 8 years they were tracking deaths, 182,000 Americans died prematurely, not from stress, but from the belief that stress is bad for you. That is over 20,000 deaths a year. Now, if that estimate is correct, that would make believing stress is bad for you the 15th largest cause of death in the United States last year, killing more people than skin cancer, HIV, AIDS, and homicide.
Okay.
Let me.
So, this is backed up by research. You know, we can change our beliefs. It's the power of our mind. So there are ways to counteract the stress response. And if you want to look up a little bit more about this, I mean, this is another workshop in itself, really. But there was some research done by the Department of Health. And they said, well, if we want to build our resilience and we want to manage stress, we can do 5 things. We can work on our connections. We can look at our relationships. We can look at keeping in touch with family, with friends, with colleagues. Just really, connections are important. We can be active. We can take notice. We can look around at the horrible weather outside. We can look at our books rather than our phones. We can connect to our food when we're eating. We can meditate, so taking notice is a big subject, but we can connect more with ourselves is what it really means. But learning new skills, all of these things help us manage stress. Giving to others helps us manage stress. So these are all ways we can learn to counteract that stress response. And I just want to sort of end with a final sort of 1 minute from Kelly talking about connections.
Okay, so how is knowing this side of stress going to make you healthier? Well, oxytocin doesn't only act on your brain, it also acts on your body. And one of its main roles in your body is to protect your cardiovascular system from the effects of stress. It's a natural anti-inflammatory. It also helps your blood vessels stay relaxed during stress. But my favorite effect on the body is actually on the heart. Your heart has receptors for this hormone. And oxytocin helps heart cells regenerate and heal from any stress-induced damage. This stress hormone strengthens your heart. And the cool thing is that all of these physical benefits of oxytocin are enhanced by social contact and social support. So when you reach out to others under stress, either to seek support or to help someone else, you release more of this hormone, your stress response becomes healthier, and you actually recover faster from stress. I find this amazing that your stress response has a built-in mechanism for stress resilience. And that mechanism is human connection.
So, human connection is the most powerful thing you can do to manage stress on top of all of those other techniques. So I've given you a few resources. I've mentioned the Dr. Harry Barry book. I've referenced the Kenny McGonigal video that I've just shared. But I want to just come back to you for a moment, and I just want to invite you to ask any questions or make any other sort of comments that you might have really about the session. So any questions at all, or anything that wasn't clear? Okay. Brilliant. All right. Well, please do stay in touch. If there's anything else you need, then please let me know. If any of those techniques that I taught you sort of resonated with you, please let Darren know, or anyone else, Natalie, and we can share the deck with you. Yes, we can share the deck if that's helpful. But yeah, I'm going to hand back to you.
Debbie, thanks very much. I've spent some time with you, as the rest of the GCMA team are, and we really value your insights, and I know our members will be feeling the same. So thanks for today. For those of you that are interested, we do have some more sessions lined up this week. We've got one tomorrow afternoon on mental health awareness, and we got one on Thursday at 4 o'clock about communication. So there are still time to register for those, and thanks for taking part in this. And remember, we do have the mental health first aiders that are split across all the GCMA regions, like Richard on the call today. Each region has somebody dedicated to the well-being of regional members. So there is always somebody to reach out to if you want to have a chat about anything at all, or if you've got anything troubling you. But hopefully we'll see you on one more of our sessions. And for today, Debbie, thank you very much again. And we'll see you all very soon.